Hey everyone, welcome to the Deep Drive podcast. My name is Jake, and I'm here with your friend and my friend Dante. Dante, you doing okay today?
Doing all right.
Good. We are here to recap Ruth chapter 3 in our series called Trust the Process. Our friend Jody Hickerson did such an amazing job teaching us through it. But before we jump into Ruth 3, we got another listener question, Dante. For those of you that are listening in and you want to ask questions, feel free. We'll answer the ones that we like. And so the big hard-hitting question is someone wants to know, how often do you get your hair cut? That was these are the things that people ask when they leave real life. So what's your barbershop frequency?
My rhythm is once every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks?
And my hair grows extremely fast, which I think is a blessing at this point in my life.
Yeah.
But it almost grows a little too fast. Like I wish, because haircuts are not getting cheaper.
No.
It used to be $20, when I was growing up. And that was enough. Now they're climbing.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough out there. I'm with you in the every other week camp. Actually, right now is 3 weeks, and it's driving me crazy. I'm sorry to those of you that are watching this on video.
Suffer through it.
This is so shaggy.
Can't even
irresponsible. It's unprofessional. See, this is what happens when you submit questions. You get good info, like our haircut frequencies. People ask weird questions sometimes. Hey, this series has been really helpful, and I love the amazing part of how a very ordinary family's story can still teach us, challenge us, shape us thousands of years later. So let me just get you with a quick recap. In week 1, we met Naomi. She's a grieving widow who had also lost her sons. She has to return to her hometown to try to recover. And she has an incredibly loyal daughter-in-law named Ruth, but she is overwhelmed with bitterness because of everything that life dealt her. In week 2, we saw Ruth show up to a field for work for her food and to provide for Naomi. And as Bro told us, it just so happened that she ended up at a field owned by a man named Boaz, a man of character, integrity, faith, and just so happened to also be in a position to where he could redeem Naomi's family. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Boaz's character today. And then this week, we learned that Naomi and Ruth, they make a plan. Naomi's very clever. She's very shrewd. She's going to figure out how to take care of this girl that she cares for. And so Ruth approaches Boaz late at night and directly asked him to take her as his wife and to redeem the family and to participate in God's grand plan. And so I thought, as we were diving into Ruth chapter 3, I was kind of I thought that since you and I have spent so much of our lives having women just throw themselves at our feet, much like Boaz, Absolutely. I thought we were probably the most qualified guys to talk about Ruth 3. I'm totally kidding, for the record. That is just not true. About my life, Dante can speak for himself. I did, however, start to wonder what a pickup line would have sounded like in the Old Testament.
Ooh,
all right?
Good biblical pickup line.
Yeah. So, because like
King
you can't
James?
just like,
what are we?
What's that?
What translation are we in? King James?
No, we're gonna go something more modern than that. You can't slide into people's DMs. You gotta like talk to people. Yeah. And so I asked ChatGPT for like what a pickup line would have sounded like 3,000 years ago. I'm gonna hit you with some. Use them if you want. All right. The first one is, I counted my goats this morning just to calm down after seeing you. It did not work. What do you rate that? Scale of 1 to 10? You think that would be effective?
I don't know if it's getting better or worse. I'm gonna give it an 8.
All right, you're 8.
Just in case there's
starting
something
high.
better
Okay.
than that.
Blind ranking Old Testament pickup lines. All right, the second one was woman, which is not a great start for the record. Woman, you shine brighter than my neighbor's bald head at high noon. I don't know why anyone would say that.
High noon is such a...
High noon is very specific. All right, number 3, you are finer than imported purple cloth and far less overpriced.
Well, I like that one.
Yeah.
I like that
Frugal. The man's got a financial sensibility about himself. All right, last one. I would cross 2 deserts, 4 borders, and your father's bad attitude just to speak with you.
I get that. That's a 10. That's a good one.
That's a pretty good one.
I'm using
Unless
that one.
she like really loves her dad. And then now you've insulted your future father-in-law. All right, those are all pretty bad. Back to what really matters here. The theme of the book of Ruth is God's providence. Yeah. It's his providential love. And he's taking care of us, setting up things for us well before we could ever see them. And in next week, as we close out this series, we're going to see that it not only was it providing a husband and a family and a safe place to live, but the doors get blown off of the grand plan that God had, and it was so much bigger than anyone could have ever dreamt. But God's providence and him providing for us is also not an excuse to sit back and wait for God to do everything. Yeah. Sometimes we pray, we say, God, you're going to have to do it. You got to write it in the clouds. You're going to have to make it happen. This is your job, God. I sit back and I receive what you are giving me. But that doesn't encourage a laziness or a passivity. And so there's a relationship between God's providence, what he's giving us, and then our responsibility to do the next right thing. And so thinking about Ruth, God created that whole gleaning system that Mike explained to us, where farmers would leave the outside edges unharvested so that the disadvantaged and the poor could come and find food. Okay. So God did that part, but then Ruth had to show up and do the work. Man, she did. She worked hard, and she went home with something to eat. God brought her to Boaz's field, but it was actually Ruth and Naomi that hatched the scheme to get Boaz interested in marrying Ruth. And so there was a partnership between God's providence and then their responsibility. How do you distinguish between those two things? What's God's job, and then what's my job? What can only he do, but then what is actually expected of me and my responsibility and faith?
Yeah, I think this question is so good, and I love that the fact that we're talking about this, and we sort of set up the series as they're just ordinary people. And so sometimes for me, it's like, what is the practical next step that I can take? So if I want a job, me just praying and say, God, give me a job, probably isn't going to do it, right? I need to get my resume together. I need to apply to jobs. I need to put myself out there. I love that meme of the person that they're wanting a relationship, and they're like, the only way I'm going to get in a relationship is if the FedEx guy, comes to my door, because I'm not going out. And so it's like, did you really take a practical step in that direction? Now, sometimes we're not going to know if this was the best practical step, but it's like, this is the one that I feel most gets me to where I'm praying God to take me. And then sometimes, as we talked about last week, it's only in hindsight, it's only in reverse that we can say, oh, I can see God's hand all throughout this. But I think if we're trying to achieve something and we've been praying on it, it's like, what is the best step that I can take? And as long as we're taking that next best step, I think God will honor it, and we'll eventually get to where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I think that as we think about what is God asking me to do, what does he want me to do next, what has he already provided for me, I'm so grateful for Mike's reminder in week 2 that God's will for our life is so much more about who we're becoming than where we go or what we do. Yeah. But there is a responsibility of embracing, growing in our knowledge of God, and seeing more the fruit of the Spirit being grown in our lives, and really pursuing a relationship with him. And then as we pursue certain jobs, or as we relationships, or whatever the outcome might be, those things are a lot out of our control, but we are engaging in a growth season where God's going to grow us. He's going to shape us. He's going to make us into who he wants us to be. And the outcomes, they're so out of our control. Yeah. Those things we can't manufacture. But sitting back and passively saying, God, I'm ready for all the good things that you're going to give me, and I will not move until you give them all to me. Yeah. That's not the setup that we see here in the book of Ruth. Now, there was another thing that we saw in Ruth chapter 3, which is this example of Boaz. And I want to talk about his extreme righteousness that he displays in chapter 3. He did the right thing, even when no one would have known, and even when it was inconvenient to his desires. Yeah. And so first, Ruth, she makes her move. She lays down at his feet. She says, I want you to marry me. I want you to redeem this family. And then Boaz, like, that sounds good to him. He wants that. He would have been quite a bit older than Ruth. And so here is this young woman who is already proven her loyalty and her work ethic, and she has chosen to follow the one true God. Like, she is exactly who Boaz would have been. He was an older bachelor. I'm sure he was excited about this opportunity. And even though it was the desire of his heart, he knew, technically speaking, there was someone else that could claim to be the kinsman redeemer, someone else that had the right to redeem Naomi's family first. And even though it was the desire of his heart. And even though it was inconvenient to what he would have wanted, he still honored the system. He trusted the process. He did the right thing, even though it didn't immediately give him what he would want. And so when you talk to people about doing that next right thing, even when it's inconvenient, how do we stay committed to our character and convictions when it would be way easier to take the shortcut?
And I think that word easier is the one that, even in my life, like gets me in trouble. Because like, I can do it and get it right now, or I can go the right way and it'll take me a couple weeks or a month. That thing, we don't like patience. We don't like having to wait. But what I've found in my own journey and then in chatting with people is my character matters, right? And if I want to say that I'm a man of high character, then doing the right thing the right way with the right timing is just important. And I think we see that in Boaz here, of him just saying, you know what, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And I would rather do it the right way. And he was taking a chance that the desire of his heart would not come to pass. Like there was a chance that this other person would be like, you know what, I'm going to claim it. And he still did that, and it ended up working out for him. And so I think the reality of the situation, while it worked out for him, it may not always work out for us, but I think we leave the situation with our character intact. And to me, that feels way better than necessarily getting it my way.
Yeah, I've yet to hear the story of regret of someone said, I did it the right way.
Yeah.
It took longer. It was harder, but I really wish I had taken the shortcut. I wish I had done the dishonest thing. I wish I had twisted the truth, or I wish I had shaded the story to I just don't hear those regrets. I hear the other ones. I hear the other ones of, I manufactured the outcome for my life that I thought was best, even if it meant sacrificing some of my character and convictions, and now I've got some regret around it. And so Boaz's extreme righteousness was on display. He didn't know it would be on display. In that moment, I don't think Boaz knew his whole life would be recorded for thousands of years for you and I to be talking about on a podcast someday. You know, like he wouldn't have even known what a podcast was, but he did the right thing, and we're using that as an example of what integrity is. It's doing that right thing when no one's looking, even when it's inconvenient. And so I don't know, as you're listening today, maybe you got a situation right now where you've got some choices on your hands, and there is a shortcut that is presenting itself. And may I implore you, along with my friend Dante, you will not regret doing things God's way, the patient way, the way of integrity. You will regret the other one. Now, there's another example of Boaz's extreme righteousness, but I want to just provide a warning to anyone that is listening right now. And maybe you have young ears around you and you would like to not be forced into a conversation you're not ready to have with your kids. You can feel free to press pause on this podcast and pick it up later, because we're going to venture into some adult conversations. So that's my fair warning. All right. I didn't do this to you. Boaz, that evening, he had a woman that he admired, that he respected, that he desired. And she was on the floor of his room late at night with no one around. On top of that, he was a rich and powerful man, and the rich and powerful are often used to either getting what they want or taking it if it's not given. But we read that Boaz was very respectful of Ruth. He did not make any sexual advances on her. And he was also very cognizant of the way it was going to look to the surrounding community. If they woke up one day and realized that Ruth spent the night with Boaz, they would come to some conclusions. And so it brings us to this cultural trend that I've observed has also snuck into church culture as well. And every dating couple, at some point, they got to figure out how quickly and in what order to bring their lives together. So there are these big moments in every romantic relationship where there's the moment where you introduce your person that you're dating to your family. Like, that's a moment. And then there's the moment when you choose to share your Netflix password with that person. That's like a big deal. Or the first time that you make friends with other couples. There's all these moments where your life is coming together and you're sharing more and more of it. And the sequence and the speed, it varies for every relationship. And so in every romantic relationship between a man and a woman, they're eventually going to have to answer these two questions: when do we sleep together, and when do we live together? It's It's going to come up at some point. Now, depending on your worldview and your upbringing and your friend group and your faith, you might answer those questions in very different ways. And so let me put it as just clearly as I can to those of you listening, Dante, to you. This is my interpretation of Ruth chapter 3. Boaz didn't have sex with Ruth that night because she wasn't his wife.
Yeah.
And it really is that forward. Like, yes, the neighbors would have talked, but that wasn't his motivation. And yes, it could have led to an unplanned pregnancy, but that wasn't his motivation either. The reason Boaz and Ruth didn't sleep together is because they weren't married. And the Christian sexual ethic is actually very, very high. And I know in our world and in our culture, that is very countercultural.
Yeah.
But when I say high, I don't mean unrealistic, and I don't mean old-fashioned, and I don't mean impossible. I mean high because it is designed by the creator of the universe, and it was meant for our good, and it's still really good. Yeah. And so sex is designed to bond a couple together irrevocably, and it's very effective at its job. It does that very thing. And so that's why we reserve it for marriage, because that's the person you want to be bonded to. And so Dante, the challenge for many Christians today, especially those that are new maybe to following Jesus, is that the world around us is telling us the exact opposite message. That sex is just for our pleasure. It's purely physical. We have decoupled the act of sex from the consequences of sex, and so it's felt inconsequential. And anyone that presents any boundaries, like I'm describing right now, it often gets labeled as repressive or unloving. So sleep with whoever you want, however you want, whenever you want. But in both of our pastoral and personal lives, we've seen the effects of a worldview that detaches sex from its consequences. And so would you mind sharing with your leaders or our listeners why you believe in God's design and why you've applied it to your own life?
Yeah, for me, I've, not just in this area, but all areas, I've just decided that God's way is better. And not that I'm perfect, not that I'll always get it right, but I strongly believe that God's way is better. And the stories that I've heard of people stepping over this bound of whether it's living together or having sex, and even the living together part, sometimes, Jake, it's like, no, I'm strong enough. Like I've got, I can stop myself. It's like, you don't have that enough willpower, But it is like you end up doing these things and then you regret, because I was so sure I was going to marry her, so I thought it was going to be okay, and then the relationship didn't work out. And whether we want to admit it all right, that sex is intimate. That was a graphic. Sex is intimate, and I feel like you are connected in ways that you didn't expect and that you didn't thought. And so when we tear this apart or it doesn't work, there's still connections there. There's consequences of sex. We have single mothers here who I thought he was always going to be around, and now he's not. And what I have found is those who do it right, there's just something there about that integrity thing, about that feeling that God's way is better, because this is how God designed it. And I think when I've sort of cemented my life in this idea that God's way is better, it just works out better for me. Now, it doesn't make it easier.
No.
Doesn't mean that I don't struggle with the thoughts or the feelings or any of that. I just have come to the conclusion that in my life, God's way is better. So I try to put that first. And as somebody who does premarital counseling, the percentage of couples who I have to have this hard conversation with is very high, of saying, hey, God designed this in a way and you guys are outside the bounds. And we're, weeks away from the wedding, and I'm still saying, hey, I think there's a better way to do this. Yeah. But it's so hard today because of what society says, because of what society is pushing.
We're being poorly led because it's become the primary gauge of the value of our life, of like in a lot of ways. If you just watched TV, movies, listen to podcasts, and you said, after listening to all that, what do you think the most important part about life is? Sex would be way too high. Yeah. It would just either number one or close to it. And it's an amazing gift that God's given. It's a great thing. It was on purpose. God wanted that to be true, wanted it to be part of our lives within the right confines, but it's like not even close to the most important part of life. But if you look at stuff, that's the conclusion you would come to. And so it's rewired our brains and value system that anything that discourages that is unfair or unloving. And it's not my lived experience. It's not what God's word says. And we trust him in his design. Now, you hit on another trend that I wanted to bring up, because this, I want to be really clear. The night that Ruth approached Boaz to do this was an extraordinary act. It was risky. There was all kinds of chance. They did not sleep together. They did not share a bed together. But it is not an excuse to say, oh, well, they lived together before they got married. This is not cohabitation. But I do want to talk a little bit about that trend of couples living together before they get married. Yeah. And again, this is one of those that, like, if you're doing that right now, if you're considering it right now, this may sound like grandpa trying to impose the old way of doing things. But let me just describe what I've noticed that is not only just happening outside the church, but inside the church as well. According to an article published by Bowling Green State University, cohabitation has become a normative pathway for many couples. In fact, it's the vast majority of couples that have gotten married since 2020 to 2022. 4 out of 5 were preceded by cohabitation. So 80%, the majority of couples. And in my experience, I've heard a lot of the stories. One of them being everything in California cost $1 billion, and so it's cheaper to live together. Another one is like, this is a trial run. You don't buy the car before taking it for a test drive. Do we enjoy living together? And I want to say this really clearly. If you lived together before you got married, if you're currently living together, if you're thinking about living with the person that you're dating right now, I am not going to beat you up, but I would like to talk to you a little bit about some of the implications. One of them being that cohabitation does not naturally promote relational health. There's just a lot of evidence that it is not inherently a better setup. It does not, without a lot of effort, result in better outcomes. In fact, there was a longitudinal study on the transition into cohabitation found that once couples moved in together, they often showed more commitment in some practical senses, but also lower satisfaction, more negative communication, and even more physical aggression than before cohabitating. In a 2022 10-year study, it found that non-marital cohabitation was linked to relationship dissolution and lower relationship adjustment over time in important ways. Though the results, they're not like simplistic and varied across couples. Every relationship's different. I want to acknowledge that. Then a 2025 study suggested that motives matter. Couples who moved in mainly to spend more time together tended to fare better than couples who moved in for convenience, finances, or because it felt like the next step. And so I think sometimes this conversation in church has gone extreme because it's just easier when you speak in extremes. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're doomed. It doesn't mean that the relationship is guaranteed to fail. I think sometimes that's been the boogeyman. We try to scare people into obedience. That's not what we're talking about at all. But there is significant data out there that says that's not going to automatically set you up for success. For instance, this is from the CDC. It said that by 3 years, couples that had cohabitated, 40% of them got married, 32% of them were still together but unmarried, and then 28% of them had broken up. And so it's not like this, A plus B equals C, it's going to work. The second thing I would say, something that you've already hit on, Dante, is that cohabitation is going to make it incredibly difficult to obey God with your sex life. I have occasionally run into people that maybe try to tell me the same thing they told you, which is we're living together, but we're not sleeping together. And quite frankly, as your premarital counselor, I'm worried about your relationship. Like, I don't know that you ought to be able to live together and keep your hands off of each other. That's not a great sign for intimacy going forward. And so I try not to roll my eyes too hard when people tell me that, but it's not going to help. You're not setting yourself up for success. And so, Dante, if you try to Google what Bible verse tells me I'm not allowed to live with the person I'm dating, you're not going to find that quote unquote. And sometimes that's what we try to do with the Bible is we say, unless it directly addresses very specific and modern experiences, then the Bible doesn't tell me I'm not allowed to do it. Yeah. The Bible doesn't have anything about social media. It was written 2,000 years ago. The Bible doesn't have anything about what you text your friends or who you, what political party in the American system you ought to vote for. It's not in the Bible because it wasn't written in our current context. But you will hear a lot of verses like this, like Ephesians 4 that says, live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Colossians 4 says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders. 1 Thessalonians talks about living quietly and working diligently so that you may walk properly before outsiders, having other people look at your life and it reflects Jesus. Titus 2 tells us to live with integrity so opponents have nothing to say. And so as you counsel people, especially like if you are either right now living with someone that you're not married to, or you maybe are parenting someone that is living with someone they're not married to, Dante, how do you have those conversations with clarity about what's true and what's most helpful for them to live the life that God designed for them, but also one that doesn't say, this is the unforgivable sin and you're a bad person and your relationship's doomed? How do you navigate those two things?
You always got to try to figure out the why beforehand. So I never go into any conversation and just let me tell you what it is that I think, but tell me, like, where did you guys make the decision? Why do you guys think that this is the best way? Yeah. And then I simply give my response to what I believe God says that is the best way. And now we can have a conversation on, like, how do we take steps to get there? And if at the end of the day you say, you know what, I'd rather continue this, like I'm not the person that's going to go in and remove anybody out of a house or anything like that. But I just want to have these open, honest conversations to try to get you to see that God's way is better. And at the end of the day, for me, any relationship that you have, what you put in it is what you're going to get out of it. And so if you say, as a person, the only way I can get to know this person is if I live with them, then you're not really putting in the work that you can, because I think you can get to know somebody without living with them. And as a person who doesn't like people in my space, that's the way I prefer to date, because I don't like people at my house. So it's very, which may be why I'm still single. Neither here nor that's another episode.
I wasn't going to say it, but everybody was thinking of it.
And so for me, it is that you got to put in the time, you put in the work. And I think sometimes for the sake of convenience, we do some things and we settle for less. But I think it goes back to that initial thing that we talked about today, this integrity of doing it the right way. And I do know, not that every marriage where they didn't live together was the thing that successfully made them work, because the divorce rate is just as high.
That's a great point. You're right. Not living together isn't the guarantee for success either. There's different factors. Keep going.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, I want a God-centered marriage. And I do think more of those are successful. And so if I put God first, God, what is that you say about this thing? What is that you say about marriage? And I'm building my relationship around that. I think those relationships have a higher level of success.
You know, I have teenagers, and they don't talk to me a whole lot about love and dating, and much like most teenagers don't want to talk to their parents about it, but every once in a while it comes up. And it's been really fascinating talking to them about it. And they have naturally bought into some of those ideas of, like, you need to date a lot of people before you find your spouse, because how else will you know? Or maybe you do need to live together before you get together permanently to make sure you like it. And what I've tried to communicate to them is, after 19 years of marriage, love is so much more a choice than something that you find convenient or comfortable or even is full of chemistry. No. You're going to choose. And so there is going to be something about this person that you're going to share your space with, and it's not going to be great. They're going to do a thing. They're going to be inconvenient. They're going to be selfish. It's going to happen. And you're going to choose to forgive, and you're going to choose to love. Yeah. And so it is entirely possible to have a healthy marriage without cohabitating. In fact, I would, as your friend, first and foremost, as your pastor, I would so strongly advocate for that route to the lifelong commitment that you're going to make to one another. And then let you know that once you start living together, there's going to be way more choices. You're just going to choose to love and choose to forgive and choose to compromise. And that's going to be what's going to set you up for success. And so any more on that particular topic?
I think that world view is, because it always messes us up. And if you're not ready to date, you shouldn't date. Yet our worldview says the thing that really makes you cool is that you're dating. So in high school, we'll start dating before we're ready to date. Right? I probably wasn't ready to date in college or in my 20s. I just wasn't there mentally. It wasn't until I was 30. So I just love that thing of not everything the world does we have to do. And I think it is just that pressure that we feel. You love the Hallmark Channel. I know you're always referencing the movies that you watch.
Big fan.
But it is that, like, this is love story of this is how life goes, and we just have to wait till you're ready, because the reality is that you're getting into a relationship with somebody, and that is precious, that is sacred, and sometimes we don't leave these things in the best sense of the world. And then I also say on the Christian side, sometimes where I have my asterisk is the pressure to get married, the pressure to have a relationship is another thing. I didn't start my career in the church. I started in the secular world, in sports, and I never got a question of when I was getting married out there. And it didn't exist.
Yeah.
I think the first month I started in church, you're not married? Why aren't you married yet? That's ridiculous. And so I think there's, even within the church, this pressure to take steps that we may not be ready for. And so I think it's a great conversation to have, and one that on both sides, I see some things that probably we just need to say, when God said, when I feel I'm ready, when I've done the work on myself to get in a relationship, then I will.
That's really good, Dante. Great perspective. And when you read scripture, if anything, there's more of an advocacy for singleness because of what how it'll help you be available for kingdom work and what God wants you to do. Yeah. That isn't always available when you're in a married relationship. And so that's a great, great perspective. I think the last thing I would want to say to anyone that's listening that either is currently living with someone that you're dating and you're not married, or you are parenting someone that is, I want to directly encourage you. There is a different way of doing this, and this isn't the only way. It may be harder. It may be more expensive. It may require undoing some things that have been done, but it's entirely possible. And as a church, we would do what we can to help you, to either help you find a different living situation or think creatively about how to do this to honor God's way of building this healthy relationship that I hope you're in for the rest of your life. And so if that's you, if you need help, if you're like, I don't even know how I would even start that conversation, that's what the church is for. And so we would love to help you. You can feel free to reach out, and we'll hook you up with a pastor that we can talk about what is available and how to set yourself up for a really healthy and life-giving relationship for the rest of your life. Well, these are the kinds of things that I don't know that everybody realizes. Oh, Ruth chapter 3 is going to lead us to talk about these topics. But that's why I love God's word, is that it's always real. It always talks about what we're going through. We may have to do a little digging to get past some cultural things that aren't obvious to us when we read it at first, but there is so much depth, and that's why we love talking about scripture and allowing God's word to speak over our lives. So excited to close it out this week with week 4 of Trust the Process. Like I've already said, God blows the doors off of the plan. We thought it was about this one family, and it is about so much more. Can't wait to see you on campus or online this weekend, and we'll see you soon.